if the government, neither the Republicans or Democrats, are properly representing my best interest. When I go to the media, I know that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post and Fox are Republican, and the Washington Post and the New York Times are Democrat. So which side, the liberal side or the Republican side, is properly representing the best interest of the public when it comes to wireless? Which one of those is telling the truth and telling accurate information about the safety and issues with wireless radiation and 5G?
You know, the media is largely, I mean, the New York Times, for example, they put forward articles on 5G and the National Toxicology Program study that have unfactual facts in them, things that are stated as facts, which are simply not true. So we have yet, I mean, there is every now and then local media may cover stories more accurately, but at the national level, we haven't seen the kind of reporting that needs to be seen. Dr. Davis has been on Sanjay Gupta, CNN several years ago. He's done several pieces on it. She's been on Tucker Carlson. There's been, you know, there's every now and then you see articles that are published in the national platforms, but the full stories are not being told the way that they really need to be. There needs to be an honest conversation about what we know, what we don't know, and what we should do. We know enough. Our scientists would say we know more than enough to know that we need to take action on this. And adverse biological effects are confirmed. Do we know the full extent in each of these different endpoints? That remains to be seen, because our bodies will be the proof. The way that how do we determine what is an established harm at the top federal level? You know, when does the WHO determine something actually causes cancer? Like with air pollution, it was like this many people have died of air pollution. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. Our bodies, we will be the statistics. Our children will be the statistics by which the final determination that it's conclusive by those authorities that people so respect. That's just inexcusable, because we know that it's not safe, and we know that there's harm at very, very low levels, much lower than the safety limits are set for.
And have you or Deborah tried calling up the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and saying, I want to speak to a reporter. I want to explain to you very clearly that with a new study came out, and giving it to them? Like, have you tried to tell them and they're ignoring you, or they don't believe it, or they say we're not allowed to publish it? Like, why is this not on the cover or in every paper? Why is this not being covered more or at all?
Well, someday when we do our tell-all book, we will tell the individual stories, because yes, we have talked to many reporters who have not published their stories. We have talked to reporters who've been working on stories, and then they get promoted or moved or doing something else, and that story never sees the light of day. I've talked to many, many reporters, and yes, we do call up papers. And I've had reporters who've actually called me crying, saying, I'm sorry, I can't do your story. That's just, yeah, all the time. And we've had some stories published. And if you're listening, go to Santa Fe, New Mexican. That was a great piece on the impacts of biolife. I mean, there are pieces that sometimes get out. Even the Wall Street Journal was doing some really good reporting a few years back. They haven't since then, but they were.
Okay. So when someone says, yeah, I don't know. I can't see wireless radiation. I can't taste it. I can't smell it. I've never heard of anyone dying from it. I can't take it that seriously. Are there what studies, how many studies have been done? How big have the studies been? How recent are they? What makes you so convinced that wireless radiation really is a health concern? I mean, is this like an occasional small study? Like what level of evidence are you and Deborah and the rest of your team looking at that's making you feel so certain that wireless radiation is an important issue when so much of the country is not making it a big deal?
So there is a paper published in the Lancet by Dr. David Carpenter and Pri Bandera that talks about the thousands of studies that have been published, because it really depends on what year we're talking about. I mean, the reality is that the existence of biological effects have been known for decades. Since in the Cold War, when Russia and the United States were developing, they were looking at radar, and there was a lot of research. In fact, the US had a robust research program under the EPA and other agencies looking at this issue. They know that it's been long known that there are biological effects. So depending on when you draw the line, I can give you a lot of numbers. You can go to the Bioinitiative, where Dr. Henry Lai has put together looking at, we often hear the majority of studies don't show harm. How many of you have heard that? Like, we all hear that, right? Well, what he did is he put together, okay, I looked at all of the studies. We have this many studies show effect, this many do not show effect. When you look at oxidative stress, for example, the majority of studies have shown an effect. And that's all in published papers that you can go to Environmental Health Trust at ehtrust.org. There's research on oxidative stress. There's research on cancer. We've long heard about, don't put that phone to your head. It might cause cancer. A lot of people come up to me and say, my mom always said, don't put your head near that microwave. Don't stick your face up to the microwave window when I'm at fairs and so forth. Well, actually, there is quite a robust amount of science looking at cancer and cell phone use. There's science that has looked at exposing animals, rodents, with the National Toxicology Program, and that study found clear evidence of cancer in the male rats. They found DNA damage in both rats and the mice. And then the Italian Ramazzini Institute, which has done a lot of studies on aspartame and vinyl chloride and a lot of the other environmental toxic exposures that we know about. And actually, they determined this even before the US government acknowledged it, but they did a study looking at cell phone radiation, except they did it at cell tower. They wanted to simulate cell tower exposures, and they found the same tumors that the US government National Toxicology Program found, $30 million study, same tumors. So there's all case control studies that are independent that have looked at people. When they've looked at people over 10 years of use, heavy use, have found associations with brain tumors. A recent study just came out with the American Cancer Society that the American Cancer Society funded. You won't find it on their website, but it was funded by the American Cancer Society at Yale. And they looked at people with a genetic disposition and found that they developed more thyroid cancer if they had this certain genetic marker, which is actually quite common. So there are many scientists who have published in the peer-reviewed literature stating that wireless radiation is a proven human carcinogen. There are many scientists who say wireless radiation is probably a human carcinogen. And then there are scientists that are saying it's not established, and many of them have long held industry ties, which you might not see right now, but if you dig in their history, it's there. And of course, many scientists go on to consult with the wireless industry after they've left. So there's a lot of, I could talk forever about the science if you want me to keep going on that, but there's no lack of science, and you can go to Environmental Health Trust and read more about this. Impacts to sleep, impacts to memory, replicated studies on impacts to memory. And that was after 1 year of use. Teenagers who use cell phones for 1 year and put the phone to their head.
Tech team, can you put the Environmental Health Trust on our screen just so we could look at that, so we can talk about that for a moment with it on the screen? So do you have on Environmental Health Trust, there are studies that people can go to if they want?
Sure, and I'll put a link. I just put a link to our court decision, and I'll put a link to research, some of the top recent studies that have been published. Now, as an example of what's going on, there are also studies that are published that seem to show no harm. There was just a study published making the news all over out of the UK million woman study that says, the headlines read, "No link found with cell phones and cancer." Only that, I gotta fix my screen here. Only that study actually only didn't assess the hours of use that people used, that these women use cell phones. And it had what we would call a very crude exposure assessment. And we actually wrote one of the scientists, because a scientist was quoted who published this study as saying, well, as long as you use phones in a usual way, we don't see a risk. So we said, well, what does usual mean? And I can read to you exactly what she said, which I will be talking about in my talk tomorrow, actually. She said, the participants in this study were not particularly heavy users of mobile phones. Only 18% reported talking on a mobile phone for 30 minutes or more each week. Let me repeat that. 30 minutes or more each week. As such, we are unable to assess the risks associated with considerably greater levels of exposure. So this study that showed no link to cancer couldn't assess for people who used considerably more than 30 minutes a week. And you think about lawyers, real estate agents, me as a mom, like I was on the phone all the time with that phone to my head. I had that phone to my head for hours every day, chatting with my girlfriends all the time, completely unaware that it even emitted radiation. That it ever emitted radiation, much less that was going in my head. I mean, who knew that?
So on your website, where would we go to find studies? If after this call, someone says, I'd like to see proof, where on Environmental Health Trust? So first, the website is what? What's the website address?
ehtrust.org.
Environmental Health Trust.org. ehtrust.org.
Yes, ehtrust.org. Take your cursor, go up to science, hover over science, and you see all that whole list there? So you can click on any of those to learn about different things like cell towers, magnetic fields, electromagnetic sensitivity, children's vulnerability, pregnancy. There's also side menus that'll come out. Take that cursor and hover over key issues too, so I can show you that. That's up top, next to the about on the main menu. And then for each of those, like under, that's breast cancer and cell phones, under 5G, if you hover there, you see facts, policy, science. So we have the science on 5G, action, resources. For each one of those, for Wi-Fi in schools, cell towers, sort of hang out with that menu for a while. We have a lot of information.
Okay.
Because this issue it's a big bucket issue. And it's quite challenging to figure out how to organize the information, I'll be honest. Because when we say, well, we'll just highlight one thing, then everyone says, well, what about smart meters? What about, where do you have this section on cell towers? Where do you have the section on AirPods? Where do you have, and they want to know everything. So we have a lot in here. Hover over Get Educated, because I think people will be interested in that section too. And you see the first one is like how to reduce cell phone radiation. And then use safer technology is things you can do at home. We have podcasts. So if you're interested in this issue, we have a lot of our lectures as we just turn them into podcasts so people can listen to them. If you scroll down to technology facts with your cursor, and you see there how we have that whole list of things. We have cell phones, cell towers, iPads, laptops, video games, smart meters, cordless phones, baby monitors. We have information on, AirPods, virtual reality, so you can learn about each one of those issues, some science, the fine print warnings, which I haven't even talked about. There's so much. So just kind of hang out on the site, and you can also scroll down on this page. Actually, what that links to, by the way, is her TED Talk, which is excellent, Dr. Davis's TED Talk. And then this next video is her talk at the University of Melbourne, which is a really nice overview on cell phone wireless radiation. And then down, we have facts on 5G. I mean, it's a big bucket, but the simple fact is many hands make light work, and we have a lot of work to do. So we hope everyone will, get involved in your community, because there's a lot going on in communities all around the United States. There are groups working on this in every state, and there's much to do and much to learn to do. And I can definitely say that if you're saying, oh my goodness, what do I do? You can unshare the screen unless there's
One thing more on the screen. If someone is saying, Theodora, I would love to help. I think it's great, but I'm so busy. I've got my own things. I really can't take time to devote to this issue. Could they instead make a donation of a monthly donation? Would that be help with that? Is there anything you can do with the money that would be, meaningful? Or do they what would a donation do? What impact does it have? A lot of us feel donations, we don't really know what happens to it. Is it really anything happened from those donations?
Yes, we absolutely can use a donation for the following things. We're making small websites dedicated to each issue to really educate people directly. So we have information specific to parents, information specifically about 5G, information specifically about environmental impacts, and we're making content, downloadable resources geared towards these different groups. We also have legal issues that we're involved in at the federal level, which are this is really the way, one of the key things to address this issue is we go federal and we go grassroots. We have to educate people so that they can pressure their elected officials, and so we can have awareness and people can make changes in their life. But we have to address the federal accountability issues at the top. So we have some actions related to the FCC that we're taking. We have we just won a lawsuit or a legal action against the FCC for their safety standards, where you can unshare the screen as well, but for their safety standards. And now we're doing additional filings asking to hold them accountable, because what the court determined is that the FCC had not done a full review of the record before that. There was a lot of scientific evidence and tens of thousands of pages of documents that had been ignored by the FCC. But then we filed in November, and we just filed in March again, more information, and we're asking them to look at the totality of the science. Now, the FCC does not have to respond in any timely fashion. They could go years, actually. They could not even look at the latest science when they finally even respond. So we're holding them accountable. We also need to be holding accountable the Environmental Protection Agency, the FDA, and the other agencies. So we're looking at legal actions related to environmental review. And we educate policymakers. We meet with those elected officials that are supposed to be representing us. And we are really holding them accountable, showing them how they can no longer say our hands are tied, because that's what they are. That's what you'll hear when you work on this issue and meet with officials. And so we are starting to just take names and numbers. We've got all the information. We have letters from the FCC. We have the statements by the FDA, everyone pointing to someone else, and it's unacceptable. And our elected officials they have to act. They have to do something about this. And that takes a lot of work, actually. We also give talks and we speak to physicians and doctors. We give lectures all over the world now. Used to be travel, now we do it by Zoom.